Hello, MCU fans! Today we're going to be placing all of the Fantastic Four trailer scenes in order, both the teaser trailer and the full trailer, and boy is there a lot to learn. So, let's dive right in and see what we can find out. Don't forget, we have an April contest running all month long. Be a subscriber, leave a comment. You can win a book or a steelbook. Best of luck. And we have a membership option with lots of cool perks, so you might check it out in case you're interested. Alright, so I love the new Marvel Studios logo custom made for the Fantastic Four movie. So we're going to start by looking at all of the scenes showing them taking off on their first mission into space, the one where they originally got their powers. We hear them saying T-5 as they're getting ready for the countdown. And in fact, we have Reed Richards pointing out before we went up the first time, meaning this is the first trip, but we're going to see another one a little later on. Notice the retro-futuristic styling of the computers. And also notice their patches. If we zoom in, it has their four names on it. All right, so here's some shots from Empire, really nice high-quality shots of them taking off into space. Here's their rocket, and they're going off on their mission. So I'm assuming we may get a flashback showing them actually getting their powers, but we'll have to see. Anyway, now we move to a tour of the Baxter Building. This is obviously the outside, and here's a nice shot from inside. Then it actually turns into more of a TV screen formatting because this is an interview being shown on TV. So Sue is saying, "Welcome to the Baxter Building." Reed says we make a point to do a family dinner every night, Sunday at 7 on the dot, no matter what, we're all here. Now, there's been some theories that Sue is pregnant at this point and they've CGI'd out her baby bump. The reason I don't think so is, notice her hair is very short. And we're going to see in later scenes when everyone realizes she's pregnant, her hair is much longer. And in fact, now we're going to move to that scene where they find out she's pregnant. We see that Herbie is cooking dinner. That stands for Humanoid Experimental Robot B-Type Integrated Electronics. Say that 3 times fast. So Ben is asking, how's the sauce coming? And Herbie kind of chirps some robot noises, which clearly Ben understands. Also notice Johnny over in the corner on the left there, getting something out of the refrigerator. We'll get back to him in a minute. So Ben says, okay, well, I'll be the judge of that. And I always love to point out the landline, another example of retrofuturism in the movie. All right, so Ben's giving it a try and says, oh, this is very good. Is this guy good or what? However, I do want to add a couple cloves of garlic, not because it's not delicious. And then Ben says, that is fantastic. Meanwhile, Johnny's like, nope, I want Lucky Charms instead. Of course, he leaves Kix on the counter, man. Kix is awesome. You should have grabbed that. Instead, he gets the sugar cereal, but maybe he got it because he is on the back of the box. Yes, that is him. And in fact, it's a pinup page from Fantastic Four number 3 from way back in the 60s. Very, very cool. All right, so then finally, Reed and Sue arrive, and they are late. They missed their 7 o'clock dinner. And Sue's like, what do you mean, late? And now we find out that late actually has more than one meaning because she's missed her period. She's late on her period. But here's the key. Look at her hair, and this is from that earlier scene. I think it's much longer, so she was definitely not pregnant in that earlier scene, but now she's just discovered that she is indeed pregnant. But Johnny hasn't figured it out yet. He says, what do you mean, what do I mean? You're late for dinner. And they're like, yes we are. And then Ben, a little more perceptive, says, are you pregnant? And Johnny's like, wait, what? So he jumps up, gives her a big hug. You're going to be the best mom in the world. And he tells Reed, you're going to be awesome too. But then he's like, no, actually, you're out of your depth. I can tell I'm really going to enjoy Johnny in this movie. But then he says, we are going to be the best uncles ever. So Reed and Sue sit down to have a toast. I'm assuming that's water, though. Sue, please tell me you're drinking water. I do wonder, though, if Johnny rattled Reed, because we have this scene where Sue says, we can do this. Nothing's going to change. So I'm wondering if maybe like Reed was getting a little nervous, about having a kid. But here they are in their massive bathroom. I mean, some people's homes aren't even this big, and this is just their bathroom. My goodness. All right, so now I want to quickly spin through a couple character shots from the trailers that are really hard to place in any order, but I don't want to lose track of the fact that we don't know where they go yet. So here we have Reed and Sue spending some time together. Here's Sue, maybe at the Future Foundation. Really hard to tell. Here we have Ben and Sue sitting together. Love that shot. Then here's Johnny looking a little confused. Here's Ben dragging a giant boat. No idea where that goes in the movie. And then finally, here's Ben entertaining a group of kids. A little hard to tell when this is happening, but it's really cute. They say, lift the car, lift the car. And he's like, this car? Sure enough, picks it up over his head with ease. Notice Yancey Street back there. That's a really important street for Ben in the comics. In fact, there's a Yancey Street gang that would keep playing tricks on him, but there actually was a Marvel 2-in-1 comic where he teamed up with the Yancey Street gang. So be interesting to see if they end up showing up in the movie or not. And then we've got the mysterious cameo by John Malkovich. So this could be early in the movie if he's one of the villains that they fight early on, or it could be late in the movie if, as some people are theorizing, he might be an older version of Franklin Richards. So we'll talk more about Franklin in a minute. All right, so now back to putting things in order. So once Sue realizes she's pregnant, some time goes by, and during that time, Reed is doing lots of work on his chalkboard. So there's all kinds of interesting things here. This looks like maybe a wormhole to another universe. Notice enter, exit, and then literally an arrow saying another universe. This right here is a Penrose diagram, and that's a very famous diagram that theoretically shows how you could use a black hole to jump from one universe to another. And then we get another shot of the chalkboard where he's crossing out some formulas that didn't work. And then here's a wide shot of the chalkboard. Big thanks to Ava for helping me get some high-res screenshots here. So right here is another Penrose diagram in the middle. And I think over on the left, that's another wormhole. And then down on the bottom, this is really interesting. Yes, those look like hexes. And no, I don't mean hexes as in WandaVision, but hexes as in jump points, like Guardians of the Galaxy. And like we also saw when Darben used the bangles in the Marvels, she actually opened one of those jump points to the point where it formed a black hole, which when that went away was a rift between two different universes. Notice all those hexes that are left behind when the rift was opened. Also, in some of the potato quality images of the trailers only shown at the fan events, notice he's at the chalkboard again, and he's talking about parallel Earths. And I believe that's the same concept that Beast was talking about when he mentioned parallel realities, and the same thing that He Who Remains was talking about when he mentioned stacked universes. So I think the Fantastic Four's universe is not part of Loki's tree, but that's obviously something we'll find out in the movie. All right, now, I think we've jumped forward in time to the point where Sue is very pregnant. You'll see why I say that in a minute. Ben is watching some footage of their first trip into space. I want to point out this. That's a pumpkin, obviously. Pumpkin decoration. I think we're in October time frame, but we're going to see Halloween decorations showing up in several of these scenes. All right, so Ben is watching the TVs, and he hears Reed saying best pilot in the world right here. And of course, that's him before he turned into the thing saying, yeah, best looking, he means. Now, he's watching the TV, right? Then the power goes out, and so suddenly he sees himself reflected in the TV, right? Because the power went out. I'm wondering, is that the same moment that we see in the trailer where massive amounts of power goes out? I mean, did the city basically lose almost all its power? In fact, is that why a bunch of people are huddled around here with emergency lamps? Or is this maybe a different scene in the movie? Kind of hard to tell. But if this is the scene when the lights go out, I do think they get them restored because we see the Fantastic Four looking up in the sky at this giant explosion of fire, and notice there are lights on in the buildings. So they're all staring up at it, and Ben, notice he is wearing the same clothing he was wearing when he was watching that TV earlier. Johnny's about to take off flying in the air, but first I want to point out more Halloween decorations, so I think this is all happening at the same point in time, in fact, the same day. So Johnny does indeed take off, flies across the sky, but ultimately I think he must land back down at street level with the rest of the team because they're all wearing those same clothes again. Notice behind them, that's the Fantasticar. We'll see that again in a minute. And then here's the real key. Notice, there's Sue, now very pregnant. So since we're in the late October timeframe at this point, that means she probably found out she was pregnant at the beginning of the year. And then there's this thing beneath their feet. So if we zoom in on it, it's really hard to read because it's not only upside down, but it needs to be flipped. So if we do both of those things, now we can kind of read that it says, on this day, something saved the city, and then the city honors, and it's a little hard to read anything else. If you can read more of it, let me know. But also notice there's some figure, which looked pretty bulky, so probably the thing, fighting something. We can't really tell. But I'm betting this is one of the early battles that they win during some montage at the beginning of the movie. But anyway, back to this scene of them all standing on the street. They're looking up at the sky at something. And in fact, others are as well, because these kids, notice Halloween, they're dressed for probably trick or treat, looking up in the sky. And sure enough, out of those flames comes the Silver Surfer. And I thought she looked really, really good. Cannot wait to see her in action. So she says, "Are you the protectors of this world?" And Sue's like, yes, we are. And Reed's like, oh, I don't know. Should we have said that? Are we in trouble now? And then the surfer says, your planet is now marked for death. So I think this is really key. She didn't say, Galactus is right around the corner. He's about to destroy you. Ha, ha, ha. No, she's saying you're marked for death, which implies to me this is a warning. Get off your planet because he's coming to eat it. So I think that's important to keep in mind. Anyway, so you see this helicopter here. She basically just flies right through it. I think that's so cool. Just flies right through it. And then Johnny takes off after her. And he flies all the way to the point where he is out of the atmosphere, so therefore has no oxygen to keep his flames going. But he does reach up and grab her surfboard. I thought that was really cool. But she just punts him off the surfboard as he hangs in space for just a minute and then starts to fall all the way back down to Earth. Now, this is really interesting. This is from the full trailer, okay? But back in the teaser, we saw another scene where he seems to be flying out of the atmosphere, but notice it's very light, it's daytime. So he flies out of the atmosphere, his flames go out, and sure enough, he's sitting here going, what do I do now? But doesn't this shot look mostly familiar to you? It should, because they just changed the background. What is going on? I refuse to believe there's twice in the same movie that he does the same thing. So did they change their mind between the teaser trailer and the full trailer on whether it's during the day or during the night? I am really curious for your thoughts on this, but that is wild. That is really wild. Anyway, so I think Reed then does a speech saying, we will protect you, trying to calm everybody down. We're going to figure this out. But basically, they've been marked for death in X number of days. Let's just say 30 days, right? We have no idea how many days. But anyway, now he has to figure out how will he protect them. So I think he's really worried. There's not enough time, he says, and there's not. Maybe they're trying to evacuate the planet. Maybe they're trying to come up with defenses to fight off the Surfer and Galactus. It's really unclear what his plan is, but he then owns up to things and says, it's my fault. I stretched the bounds of space and they heard. So I'm guessing they is the Silver Surfer and Galactus. Now, I think Sue is still very, very pregnant. I think this is not that long after the scene of them on the street where we saw her pregnant. You can't really see her belly there, but look at her hair and look at the sweater she's wearing. Because we have this scene where she walks in on Johnny and look at her hair and look at her sweater. Same sweater, different shirt, but same sweater, very much pregnant. And I think we see that they're planning for another space flight because Johnny's trying on his suit, I guess, to make sure the spacesuit still fits. And then we see Reed and Sue are very concerned. Sue's looking over the empty crib because she's still pregnant, obviously. And then Reed comes in to console her, but notice he's staring at the little planets above the crib because I think he's thinking about this space flight. And then here's where I'm really sure of it, because Sue says to him, it has to be us. And this is where he says, before we went up the first time, so the original flight where they got their powers, you couldn't turn invisible, Ben wasn't a rock, and Johnny never caught fire. But Sue says, Ben has always been a rock, Johnny is, well, Johnny, and I'm right here. So she's trying to convince him it has to be us, we have to make this flight. Okay, so what's this flight all about? Well, I think it has something to do with that time limit, basically, the Silver Surfer gave them before she was coming back with Galactus. Because now we have these news reporters taking pictures of them as they're heading in. Notice they've got their spacesuits on. Well, everybody except for Sue. Isn't that interesting? And if we zoom in a bit on her back, I realize that's blurry, I'm really sorry, but it says Future Foundation. So we've been seeing hints about Future Foundation in the marketing because they showed us this. And of course, in the comics, Future Foundation is this big think tank with tons of superheroes in it. But since the Fantastic Four are the only superheroes on this Earth, I'm betting it's just going to be them running it. But Sue seems to be in charge, which is really cool. So then the reporters are asking, are we safe? And Ben and Johnny are like, ask Reed. But Reed's like, I don't know. Which had to be hard for him to say. For him to admit he doesn't know something has to be painful. But notice they're avoiding showing us any images of Sue. Well, at least that is until they get out into space. So we know this is a second trip out in space because this is what their original suits look like. And of course, the patch now, instead of having their names on it, has the Fantastic Four logo. But what is going on here? Sue's not even wearing her suit. Now, I'm guessing she is still pregnant. So she went up with them while she was pregnant. And then here she is going in and out of being invisible, which is just crazy, right? And then here's Reed looking out the window at something going on outside. Okay, so I'm going to take a guess here that they flew in their ship to some other planet that Galactus was about to destroy. Because I don't think this is Earth. In the trailer, they're heading towards this planet, not away from it. The ship is flying towards this. So I'm wondering if they tried to track down the Surfer to beg them not to destroy Earth. Also interesting, notice the cloud formation around this planet being destroyed. Kind of reminds you of that cloud from the 2007 Fantastic Four movie, right? But I'm sure we're not getting a cloud again. Please, please no cloud. But anyway, assuming that they have gone to another planet being destroyed, then that might be when this scene is occurring with the Silver Surfer. Maybe they got onto the ship and they're trying to convince the Surfer to spare Earth. Go somewhere else, please, anywhere but here. So let's just assume for the minute that they're successful, that they convince the Surfer to go somewhere else, or at least that's what they're hoping, right? So now we move to what I believe is the third act of the movie. So we see the Fantastic Car driving somewhere. We'll see where in a minute. And we saw an image of the Fantastic Four in one of the fan events, literally floating across the sky. That was really cool. But anyway, now I think where they took the Fantastic Car is to the Ted Gilbert Show. Now, the trailer made it seem like this was the beginning of the movie. I don't think it is. I think it's part of the third act. So, Ted Gilbert Show is definitely an homage to the Ed Sullivan Show. He was a very famous talk show host back in the 60s, and of course, this movie is taking place in the 60s. And even notice the stars in the logo for the Ed Sullivan Show. Same thing with the stars for the Ted Gilbert Show. Anyway, Ted says, well, folks, we all know the story. 4 brave astronauts head into space and come back forever changed. So he's just telling the audience about their origin. And I love this. The crowd is so excited, probably outside the building as they're driving up to the building. But anyway, they're holding Fantastic Four flags. So very cool. Anyway, he says, our city, our planet, owe a debt to these intrepid souls. And then we see all these kids booking it over as fast as they can so they can get to this TV, as Ted is saying, and while we can never repay them, we can certainly celebrate them. And notice here on the TV monitors, upper left, you see that original space flight. Upper right, that's again why I think this footage is from very early in the movie. That's when they were giving a tour of the Baxter Building. And then lower left is Johnny, lower right, of course, is Herbie. So I think they're being celebrated for saving the day. They convinced this strange Silver Surfer thing that everybody saw in the sky to leave them alone and go somewhere else. So they're being celebrated for saving the Earth, basically. So we hear a bunch of people saying, thank you, Fantastic Four. Thank you. Thank you, Fantastic Four. And this dude's doing a little toast for them. He's happy. And then Ted is saying, please welcome the Fantastic Four. And we see the crowd, and once again, they have the little Fantastic Four flag, but also this little poster saying, I love the Fantastic Four. Then we see the Fantastic Four standing up there on a stage, but look at how nervous they look. They don't seem real excited. I think that they know that they might not be as safe as everyone else thinks. But anyway, notice Sue. Sue is no longer pregnant, so she has given birth. So at least some time has gone by. Maybe a month, maybe 2. Kind of hard to say, but definitely she's given birth and then basically got back her original figure again. Then we see them posing on this stand. And of course, this is an homage to another fabulous four, the Beatles. The Beatles actually debuted on the Ed Sullivan Show, so it makes sense for them to be honored on the Ted Gilbert Show. But now things are about to go crazy because Galactus has arrived. So he is able to shrink himself down because he's normally like massive, like celestial sized. But he's able to shrink himself down so he can walk on the earth. In fact, we see his big old shoes as he's crashing through the city. And then I think he heads straight to the Baxter Building because he's looking in on Herbie. This is some of that potato quality footage that we still don't have in the trailers. Come on, Marvel, give us this footage. But anyway, Herbie looks up at him and he's like, this is not good. So if my theory is right that the Fantastic Four convinced the Surfer to have Galactus spare the Earth, then why is he here now? I am guessing he was drawn to the Earth because of Franklin Richards. Franklin has now been born to Reed and Sue, and in the comics, he is so OP. At one point, he actually resurrects Galactus from the dead, and at another point, Galactus is actually his herald. I mean, the dude is crazy powerful, and it seems that there is this weird relationship between him and Galactus. Also, it is worth noting, Franklin Richards in the comics was one of the people that helped recreate the multiverse after the 2015 Secret Wars saga. So yeah, I think Galactus is looking for Franklin. But the Fantastic Four aren't here because they are at the Ted Gilbert Show. See, I'm pretty sure that literally, the show that they're being honored at, they now have to book out of it because Galactus is attacking. So something I want to point out is this monorail. We're going to keep seeing that in all the scenes coming up. So Johnny decides to take flight and survey the city. He's flying around trying to figure out what's going on. I love this shot where he's flying under the bridge. That's really cool. But eventually he must come back again because now we see the four of them and we see tons of destruction. So this explosion in the sky. Notice this sub-zero intel. Keep that in mind because we're going to see that showing up again in a second. But there's the monorail I was talking about running overhead. So then this poor little girl, I think she's about to be stepped on because she reaches down to pick up her thing doll and then looks up, and I think that shadow is Galactus's foot. So Sue's going in to save her. Notice the sub-zero intel. So this is all happening in the same area. There's the monorail, and there's actually the Fantastic Car back in the background. So that's cool. So I love how they show her powers with the light refracting like that. That's really cool. And then it seems like she's straining, to keep, I'm assuming, Galactus's foot from smushing that little girl. Then we see the Thing booking it, not really sure what he's doing. Although in the full trailer, he seems to be smashing these pillars, maybe to topple a building on Galactus. Then we see Reed finally doing some stretching. I love it, right? Very, very cool. Notice on the bottom of his boot, we can see the 4. So they've actually got logos on the bottom of their shoes. Too funny. And then this is obviously Galactus there on the left. But the question is, what the heck is in his hand? What is this thing? So here's another image of it. And then I want to give a big thanks to Chris for throwing out a fascinating theory. Chris wonders, could this thing be modeled after Thor: The Dark World? Who would have thought Thor: The Dark World could continue to be such an important movie if this theory is true? Notice this device. You might remember this is what they used at the end of the movie to basically not only track when wormholes were forming, but to even use them to their advantage to fight Malekith. Is it possible Reed is going to try to use it to send Galactus through a wormhole? Oh, that would be crazy, right? Anyway, I love the theory, Chris. I hope you're right. Okay, so back to this question. So is this scene where I was guessing originally that they were going to visit another planet Galactus was attacking, or is this actually Earth being destroyed? Again, the key thing to keep in mind in the trailer, the ship is heading towards the planet, so it just doesn't seem like this is Earth. But it could be. It could be this is the destruction of Earth. But I do think the final battle is with Galactus, and then something happens, which then leads them to get into 616, obviously, into the main MCU. And then I want to end with this inspirational message from Sue. I'm not quite sure where it fits in the movie yet, but she says, whatever life throws at us, we'll face it together as a family. Very, very cool. So yeah, Marvel Studios, Fantastic Four, First Steps. Cannot wait for this movie to arrive July 25th. So let me know your thoughts. Do you think I got everything right? Would you move anything around? Did this give you maybe some extra insight into the movie? I'm just really excited. I think this movie looks really, really good. All right, so don't forget about that contest. Be a subscriber, leave a comment, win a book or a steelbook, and there's the membership option in case you're interested in that. And then I always love to mention the Discord. Here we are in the Marvel Theories section where Chris is throwing out that excellent idea about this device being from Thor: The Dark World. So we have 2,100 members across the globe, conversations 24/7, and I'll leave a pinned comment so you can join. Also, if you don't mind, like this video, subscribe if you haven't already. You can check out more content, and we'll all continue to enjoy the ever-growing, the ever-changing Marvel Cinematic Universe.